I started wondering if all of the success that I had in launching Sseko, and by the way, not without plenty of failures along the way. You know that factory I got locked in? I spent 2 years working on a project to launch closed-toed shoes out of that factory that ended up failing miserably. So bad, in fact, that I actually buried a pair of those shoes in my backyard, because I have come to believe that even our bad ideas deserve the dignity of being laid properly to rest. If you're curious about what a bad ideas funeral looks like, there it is. R.I.P. to those pink loafers. But anyway, that's kind of besides the point. I started wondering if the success that I did have had less to do with beginner's luck and everything to do with a little something I like to call beginner's pluck. Okay, let's talk about the word pluck. I'm not referring to the verb pluck, which is what you do to that pesky chin hair when you think no one is watching. I'm referring to the brilliant and underused noun pluck. It means spirited and determined courage. I started thinking that maybe what my younger self lacked in experience and resources and previous success that she made up for with spirited and determined courage. Maybe she didn't succeed despite her beginner status, but perhaps it was precisely because of it. I started thinking really intentionally about the mentalities and the mindsets that I had in my earliest days, long before I would have self-identified as an entrepreneur or a leader or a designer. And I started wondering if 10 years into running this company that has millions of dollars in annual revenue and hundreds of employees on multiple continents and insurance premiums and payroll taxes and burn rates, if maybe learning how to really intentionally channel my inner beginner could help me become a more effective and courageous and creative leader for the long haul. I want to talk about the 4 stages of learning. You've likely heard about these before, and if so, you've probably seen something like this to illustrate the 4 stages of learning. We all start out in the land of unconscious incompetence. It's kind of like the happy-go-lucky place. You don't know what you don't know. My 3-year-old son is living his best life in unconscious incompetence every day. And then we have this moment of awareness, right? You make the team. You get the promotion. You get into the dream school. You raise your hand and ask for more responsibility. You get called into a position of leadership. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head. I don't know what I'm doing. This stage is super uncomfortable because our egos are super fragile in this stage and our insecurities rage. And the best advice we seem to get from any of the experts is like, oh, fake it till you make it. Just kind of like work through it and get through it as fast as possible until you emerge into this state of conscious competence. Now, conscious competence is when you're like, okay, I can do this. Take some practice, take some intentionality, but I got this. But practice makes perfect, right? So just keep practicing, and eventually you will emerge into the golden state of unconscious competence. This is when you are so good. You have so much mastery and expertise that you can literally do this thing in your sleep. And this is where we get to become the leaders and the influencers and the mentors that we've always dreamed of being, right? Wrong. Actually, this view of learning it's actually really insidious, and it's kind of toxic. And if this is what you believe about how we learn, it's actually going to keep you from being a leader who takes risks and who innovates, and it's certainly going to keep you from being somebody who can equip and inspire and encourage other people to do the same. Because when we believe in this model of learning, we start to act out of fear of losing our place at the top of the almighty pyramid, right? And those feelings that we feel down in the land of conscious incompetence that were already uncomfortable, they become even scarier because they're a signal that we got knocked down a notch, right? Or perhaps even worse, they're a signal that we've been stuck down there all along, and we just maybe convinced a few people that we were further along than we were, and now we're about to get found out for being the frauds that we are. But the 4 stages of learning are actually a cycle. And innovative and courageous leaders do not avoid the stage of conscious incompetence because it's really, really uncomfortable. But rather, they understand that mastery and expertise, it's not actually the end goal. The end goal is to be someone who is constantly moving through the stages of learning. And I would argue that the most enlightened leaders, the pluckiest, if you will, of leaders, they celebrate not just when they reach mastery and expertise, that's important and it's awesome and it's part of the cycle, but they celebrate when they find themselves back in the land of conscious incompetence. Because that means that they did what only real leaders and real visionaries do. When they completed their previous learning cycle, instead of staying in fear and comfort and protecting their ego, they voluntarily dove back into the land of conscious incompetence. Or as I like to say, the magical land of beginners. So in my book, Beginner's Pluck, which is actually pre-launching here today at Plywood, it's not available anywhere else for another few months. Jeff has been such an amazing encouragement and friend in my life and in this project, and I'm so grateful that we get to launch it here at Plywood. I'm going to share my story of starting and growing Sseko, but I also share the 14 principles of Beginner's Pluck. These are the mentalities and mindsets that I truly, truly believe that if we learn and live out, will allow us to become more effective and courageous leaders. We will be more likely to voluntarily dive out of comfort and expertise and back into the cycle of learning. And those things that used to ignite our insecurities and that used to make us feel like we were going to get found out will become the very things that make us say, honey, I'm home. I'm back in the magical land of beginners. So I obviously can't share all 14 principles with you today, but I just want to let you know that they're just really feel-good, inspirational things that we're going to talk about. For instance, I'm going to tell you how important it is that you dream small. Okay. But for real, I am going to tell you that, you know what, each and every one of you, you just have to go out there and, I'm going to have to break it to you that you're never going to find your passion. How's that for inspirational? I know. But here's the thing. You're not going to find your passion because your passion isn't out there waiting to be discovered. You can't find your passion, but you can build it. And we're going to talk about that. Lastly, obviously, this one is like each and every one of you in this room. You are just so incredibly average. Here's the deal, you guys. Statistically speaking, this is how statistics work. Most of us in this room are just all hanging out, kind of there right in the center of the bell curve, okay? We're all pretty average, but I believe that if you learn how to just freaking own your average, you're actually gonna be more likely to build an extraordinary life of purpose and passion and impact. I'm thinking, thank you. I'm thinking about putting that one. It's so inspiring, maybe on a t-shirt for our fall collection. But here's the thing. I think the principles of Beginner's Pluck might surprise you because over the last 10 years of running my social enterprise and teaching and training and coaching thousands of others to do the same, I have seen firsthand what this like ubiquitous inspirational narrative of like, everybody go find your passion and you'll never work another day in your life is actually doing to people. And I have to tell you, I think we have some things very wrong. It's not okay because that message that I think is supposed to encourage and inspire us is actually creating some serious fear and anxiety and analysis paralysis. I want to start with this culprit, okay? Dream big. Okay, you cannot open up Instagram, you cannot walk down the self-help aisle without some inspirational guru, probably on an island somewhere, shouting this at you. And here's the thing, I agree with it. If you have known me for more than 10 seconds, I love dreaming big. But the problem is, over the last 10 years, I've met literally thousands of people who are like, yeah, duh, of course I want to dream big. But how? How do I get the big dream in the first place? Or perhaps even worse, they're like, well, I have this dream, but I'm not doing anything with it because I don't know, is it big enough? Principle number 3 of Beginner's Pluck is actually to start out by dreaming small. You guys, when I get introduced sometimes on a stage, oftentimes somebody will talk about how I quit my job and bought a one-way plane ticket to Uganda, and I'm a big dreamer. And while it's very fun to be seen as someone who's this easy breezy big dreamer, I want to be really honest with you and tell you the story about how that actually went down. You see, when I was in college, I was passionate about issues that were facing women and girls who were living in extreme poverty and in conflict and post-conflict zones. I wrote papers about it, I did research, I marched in protests, I went on to get my master's degree, all the while plotting and planning this huge vision and dream of this corporate philanthropy thing. It was going to bring millions of women and girls out of poverty. Then I graduated from grad school, and I went out to find my dream job, and it turns out the New York Times is not very interested in hiring someone who's to do international correspondence, who's never really left the United States of America before. So I got a job at a big corporate communications firm, and I spent every day compiling media reports and helping big companies get bigger. And slowly, as tends to happen with my big dream, I had it kind of in my back pocket waiting, because obviously I needed a different job, I needed more of a budget, I needed more expertise before I could even think about getting this big dream off the ground. But every day that I kind of just spent thinking and dreaming about it, it started to feel more elusive, a little more impossible, a little bit more like kind of the silly remnants of this idealistic grad student who is now just out in the real world trying to make it. And then I had a moment where everything changed. I was sitting at my desk on the 18th floor in this cubicle, and I had this moment where I realized I said I was really passionate about this huge global issue of women and girls living in extreme poverty, but the reality was I didn't have a single friend who was a girl who grew up with this experience. I had this incredibly humbling and sobering moment where I realized that I had spent all this time thinking and dreaming and pontificating about millions of women, and all the while, the sacred value and importance of just one clearly got lost somewhere along the way. And I'm sitting there with tears streaming down my face when, without even really realizing it, I kind of trade in that huge dream, and it becomes really, really small. My new dream becomes not about bringing 1 million women and girls out of poverty. My new, microscopically small dream is making one friend, knowing one woman, being in relationship from and learning from one girl who grew up unfairly asked to shoulder the burdens of the world. That was it. I didn't need $1 million budget to do that. I didn't need any experience. I didn't need any permission, which of course meant no excuses. The moment I kind of traded in that big dream and I started dreaming really, really small, what actually ended up happening is I became a doer instead of just a dreamer. I bought a one-way plane ticket and I moved to Uganda. Can you imagine what my parents said about that? So I quit my first job in the height of the recession to move to Uganda. They were like, Uganda? We've literally never left the United States. We grew up vacationing in Destin. And no offense to Destin, but they were like, you're moving to Uganda? Okay, wait, you're moving to Uganda to do what? And I'm like, Mom and Dad, I'm going to make a friend. And they were like, can't you just join a running club like your sister? There's no one that wants to hang out with you here? But here's the thing. What Pluckies know is that small dreams have a surprising power of catapulting us out of waiting and into creating. What Pluckies know is that you're never going to find your passion because your passion actually isn't out there in your dreaming waiting to be discovered, but your passion and your purpose is made in your doing. So I showed up in Uganda without a plan, very aware of my incredibly conscious incompetence, which in hindsight is actually the only way that you should ever show up to a new country or place or culture or community. And I ended up just through my journey of making friends and building community, meeting some of the brightest women in the entire world. These women were in the top 5% of students in their country. They tested into college, but they couldn't afford to go. So, like a good American, just jumping to conclusions, I started a charity, and then for a variety of reasons that could be its own talk, became very convinced that we needed to use sustainable, dignified marketplace solutions to solve some of the world's most interesting challenges. So I started a chicken farm. And that went about as well as you can imagine it going from someone who had to look up what do chickens eat on Wikipedia. But to be fair, I don't think that they were that much worse off with me than they were with this guy. I mean, that's like at least 60 live chickens attached to the back of that motorcycle. And then my friend Molly from back home was like, what about those like strappy, funky sandals that you made when we were in college? And I spent the next several months traveling across the country, prototyping and putting together raw materials and prototyping out these sandals. And then I went back to the school that I was volunteering at. And I sat down with 3 young women, Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca. And I made a promise to them that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I said, if you make sandals for the next 9 months, I promise that you will go to university in the fall. And they were like, okay. And I was like, okay. And then I came back home and started selling sandals out of the back of my car, which is definitely what your parents want you doing with that master's degree. So like 4 days after I get back from Uganda, my now husband, Ben, proposes to me. Yeah, I remember this. Star-studded red carpet event. He's literally down on his knees asking me to marry him, and I know that I should be thinking these like very romantic, gooey thoughts, and instead I'm like, ooh, should we talk about the fact that I promised 3 women in Uganda that I would pay for them to go to university if this little sandal scheme doesn't work out? Or should I wait until after we're married and we join our bank accounts? So I waited until after. About a year after Ben and I got married, he quit his full-time job. We sold everything that we owned, bought a Honda Element, and hit the road. We lived out of our car. We slept on strangers' couches. We took baths in McDonald's bathrooms to launch this brand. Fast forward about a decade, and Sseko Designs is one of the largest exporting companies in the country. We have an all-star, amazing, entirely Ugandan management and executive team. We have enabled hundreds of female scholars in Uganda to continue on and become leaders in their community. We've created dignified, fair-wage jobs for thousands of artisans all across the world now, and we've created opportunity for thousands of women here in the United States to launch and grow their own social enterprises. This is Billy and Carissa, 2 of our Sseko fellows that happen to be with us right now. Woo-woo, yeah! Make sure you go stop and check out. Both of these women are making an incredible impact, not just for women in East Africa, but right here at home. But make no mistake, all of this, it all started with the microscopically small dream of just wanting to make a single friend. So if you are on the starting block, or maybe you're at a crossroads, if you are feeling stuck or scared or overwhelmed, or maybe you're leading other people who are feeling that way, please do not do anything else until you give yourself or those that you lead the permission to dream small. Because those small dreams have a really surprising power in catapulting us out of waiting and into creating. Okay, I only have 3-ish more hours? 3 hours? We feel good about that? Okay, I can't get through all 14 principles, so I'm gonna skip forward to one of the last principles in the book, and that is specifically for those of you who are in this room. Because I think that if you're in this room, you have evolved past the point of like, I'm trying to get rich and make my life good for just me. And I'm guessing that you want to use your power and your privilege and your gifts to make the world a little bit brighter and better for others too. I hope that that's the truth. But what I want you to know is that no one needs or wants you to be their hero. okay? Over the last decade of being in this kind of like do-gooder space, I'm just gonna be really honest with this room of people. I have become increasingly uncomfortable with this dichotomy, right? Between the world changers and their beneficiaries, and the do-gooders and the people who benefit from that, and the givers and the receivers. For me, it showed up very clear when I showed up as like a 22-year-old American who had literally nothing to offer, and just for going to Uganda, I was seen as like a giver, right? Which means that the people that I was meeting in Uganda, I think were supposed to assume this role of like grateful beneficiary. No, you guys, we are called to live in community. And you know that it's really community when we're doing this really sacred and messy dance of needing and being needed, of giving and receiving. This is how humans are designed to coexist together in a way that pushes us all towards greater empathy and dignity and unity. And the moment we get confused and think that our or someone else's season or their circumstance is the permanent role that they're meant to play in relationship, we strip them and ourselves, frankly, of the dignity of being these complex and multifaceted human beings. Each and every one of us, in our own way, so terribly broken, but also so brilliantly bright.